My name is Evelyn Carter, and on the 31st morning, I saw 3 grown children once who hadn't visited their mother in months, standing on her porch weeping like schoolboys who'd skinned their knees. But that day was no accident, and those tears weren't for show. They were the result of a line drawn in the dirt, a line their mother never thought she could hold. Before we reached that morning, there was the Sunday when everything quietly began. It was one of those calm, Midwestern mornings that feel like they've been preserved for decades, white steeple brick steps worn smooth, and a breeze that smelled faintly of coffee and cut grass. I had come early to church, as I often did, partly for the quiet, partly to avoid all the cheerful chatter people felt obligated to spill after service. I liked the porch best wooden benches faded to a soft gray, a sanctuary before the sanctuary. That was when I saw her Ruth Miller sitting alone with a paper cup trembling between her hands. I'd known her for years, not closely, but in the way church people know each other, casseroles after funerals, nods from across pews, Christmas programs, where everyone pretends they can sing. But that morning, when she looked up at me, her eyes weren't just tired. They were hollowed out like something had burned through all the good parts and left ash behind. "Evelyn," she whispered as if saying my name out loud might snap her open. I sat beside her quietly, the way older women do when words aren't ready yet. I watched the breeze lift her gray hair and saw suddenly the worn lines that worry had carved along her cheeks. Then she inhaled like someone bracing against cold water and said, "I'm tired of being the ATM for my own children." The words hit me harder than I expected. Every parent I knew, especially mothers, carried hidden burdens for their grown kids. But the way she said it with exhaustion and shame tangled together made me turn toward her fully. I gave them 1 month of grace. She continued staring past the parking lot, maybe into the years she'd already lost. I told them I was stopping. No more rent money, no more grocery cards, no more paying their fines, their overdue bills, their children's school shoes. Her jaw tightened. "They laughed in my face, Evelyn, all 3 of them. They said it was just a threat." Her voice cracked on the word threat like she hated herself for even needing to say it. Ruth had 3 adult children, Michael married with 3 kids and a backyard full of toys. Laura newly divorced and always on the edge of emotional tragedy, and Eric the baby at 28 still bouncing between jobs and apartments like a loose marble in a drawer. I'd watched them grow up, watched their father's funeral 10 years earlier, watched Ruth shrink under responsibilities no one else stepped in to carry. "And do you know what scares me most?" she whispered. "That they're right. That I won't do it. That I'll fold like I always have." I felt something stir in me, maybe a memory of my own years raising 2 boys who only remembered I existed when car alternators died or rent jumped $20. Maybe my own loneliness. Maybe the unspoken truth that mothers sometimes disappear behind other people's needs. So I said what my grandmother once told me back when I thought motherhood meant self-erasure. "Boundaries," I told her, "are a gift." Ruth shook her head. "Gift to who? Certainly not to them." "No," I said softly. "To you. And eventually, if they're wise, to them too." She let out a humorless laugh. "My kids don't do wise. Michael believes responsibility is beneath him because he works hard. Laura thinks the world owes her for suffering. And Eric." Her eyes softened. "Eric's my fault. I never let him fail. He's never learned how." There it was, the confession older mothers make behind closed doors. The truth that sometimes love becomes a trap, with velvet lining, easy to enter, impossible to escape. Ruth looked toward the church doors. A month feels long and short at the same time. I'm terrified they won't change. And I'm more terrified of what I'll do when they come back angry. "Not angry," I said quietly, "desperate." She flinched at the word. Maybe she pictured Laura's big brown eyes filling with tears, or Michael pounding on her door, demanding she help him one last time, or Eric collapsing into the helpless child she'd never allowed to grow up. We sat that way for several minutes. No sermons, no advice, just two aging women sharing the ache of loving too much. Finally, she whispered, "If I lose them." "You won't," I said, though I couldn't be sure. "You'll lose the version of them that takes you for granted. And maybe that's the one worth letting go." A few people waved as they passed us heading inside. Ruth didn't move. She stared at her hands, pale fingers wrapped around the coffee like a lifeline. "I hope you're right," she murmured, "because I don't have anything left to give." I laid my hand over hers. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. The bell rang inside. She stood slowly, like her bones carried the weight of 3 grown children and a decade of grief since her husband died. As she stepped through the church doors, she paused and looked back at me. "1 month," she said, more to herself than me. "I'll try." Neither of us knew, though maybe both of us feared, that the real story wasn't the month ahead, but the day that followed it. The day when that porch, this same porch, would witness those 3 children knocking, pleading, and finally understanding what love without limits had cost them. The days after that Sunday felt unusually heavy, like clouds hanging low before a storm that refuses to break. I didn't see Ruth again for almost a week, but I thought about her every time my phone buzzed with a group text from my own kids asking for help with one thing or another. Little things these days. Thank heavens, but enough to remind me that motherhood is the one job you never retire from, even if you wish you could sometimes. When she finally came back to church, she didn't sit on the porch. She walked straight inside, chin-up, hands folded tight like she was keeping from trembling. I waited until after the last hymn to approach her, but before I opened my mouth, she nodded and said I did it. I called them. She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe she'd survived the words she'd spoken. I told each of them no more. I'll help with childcare if they need time. I'll cook dinners if someone needs rest. But the bank, she swallowed hard, is closed. She exhaled as if she'd been holding that breath for decades. We sat together on a back pew while the pastor locked up, and she told me how it happened. Michael called first, like he always does. Oldest siblings have a funny way of assuming authority over their parents, like the moment they turned 18, they inherited the crown. He said he just needed $150 to get through the week, she murmured. Said his wife budgeted wrong and they'd pay me back. She looked at me, eyes widening with disbelief. Evelyn, they borrowed over $8,000 from me last year. They never paid back a dime. Still, I imagined her standing there with the phone pressed to her cheek, wincing as she said, "No, son, I can't." When he didn't convince her, he got angry. That's the move most grown children make. Frustration is easier than reflection. "What did he say?" I asked gently. She sighed. That I'm selfish. That I care more about my savings account than my grandchildren having food. Her eyes watered. He knows I would jump into the fire for those babies. But she held her ground. The call ended with a slammed receiver and a silence that felt like punishment. Next came Laura. She didn't even pretend to understand, Ruth whispered, just launched into how unfair life is and how I have always favored her brothers. I smiled sadly. In families with more than one child, someone always thinks they got the smallest piece of love. "Did she ask or demand?" I said. She half laughed. "It's Laura," she demanded. And when I said no, she cried so loudly the whole apartment probably heard her. And then she told me I'd abandoned her emotionally and she'd never forgive me. I touched her arm. "Did your heart break?" She blinked at me. "Yes, and that's how I knew it needed to." Silence fell between us, thick with recognition. Sometimes hearts don't break from cruelty, they crack open from clarity. And Eric, I finally asked. A shadow moved across her face. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just said, "Okay, Mom," and hung up. But the tone. She shook her head. He sounded like a little boy who lost his safety blanket. We sat together for a long time. Because we both understood the truth beneath the money, the children hadn't been relying on dollars. They'd been relying on her certainty, her presence, her endless, soft place to fall. And when she withdrew it, it wasn't wallets that emptied. It was identity. Over the next couple of weeks, I watched the change in her. At first, she carried tension in her shoulders like a coat she couldn't take off. She avoided eye contact with friends, afraid someone would ask how the kids were, afraid she'd break and confess she didn't know anymore. But then slowly she started to unfurl. She joined the quilting group on Tuesdays. She started taking morning walks instead of sleeping with her phone beside her pillow. She cleaned out her garage and found her husband's old fishing tackle. I cried for an hour, she told me, but it felt like the good kind of crying. It reminded me how many widows I'd seen shrink into nothing but their children's problems after their husbands passed, women who replaced partnership with servitude, tenderness with obligation. One morning, we bumped into each other at the grocery store. She had a list written neatly, and for the first time in years, not a single thing was for anybody but herself. I teased her gently about the fancy yogurt she tossed in the cart. She chuckled. "Would you believe I haven't bought the brand I like in 5 years? The kids always wanted that sugary pudding kind. I got so used to saving every spare dollar for them that I forgot what I like." That's when it struck me not just that her kids had learned to lean, but that she had forgotten how to stand. But while Ruth stretched into her newfound quiet, her children reacted the way any dependents do. When the source dries up, they flailed. One Sunday, I overheard 2 younger women whispering about Facebook posts from Michael's wife, Cryptic Barbs, about deadbeat grandmas and family betrayal. Ruth pretended not to notice, but I saw the muscles in her jaw tighten. Laura took to sending group texts to relatives about being abandoned. Eric, sweet but lost, stopped answering calls altogether. Ruth confessed to me later. Every day, I expected one of them to show up at my door. But they didn't want to see me. They only wanted what I had. She paused, then voice turning gritty. That's the hardest part. Realizing the people you fed, clothed, prayed over, and tucked in at night only come running when something burns. But even with the loneliness, she kept her line one day at a time. Boundaries are a gift, I had told her. What I hadn't said, because I wasn't sure she was ready, was this. The first person they free is the one who draws them. By the 3rd week, the quiet around Ruth's house had become something else entirely. Not silence, but absence. The kind that rattles the windows at night and makes every creak in the floorboards feel like a memory wandering through the dark. She told me once that she'd spent the first few days pacing, waiting for a text, a knock, a crisis that forced her hand. But as the days stacked up, she started waking to something unfamiliar. No phone buzzing before the sun rose, no frantic voices begging her to fix what they'd broken. It felt wrong at first, she admitted one Wednesday morning when we met for coffee at the local diner, the kind with chipped red stools and waitresses who call you hon. Like I was watching my house after someone moved out. I nodded. Every mother I'd known who finally tightened the reins said the same freedom can feel like grief. Yet even in the ache, small pieces of herself were returning. She'd begun sleeping through the night. She joined the ladies at church helping assemble care baskets for shut-ins. She visited the library, something she hadn't done since her husband Tom died, and checked out a mystery novel so thick she said it felt rebellious. But the storm wasn't done with her yet. The first real lightning strike came after she declined paying Michael's electric bill. He called twice, she said softly, stirring her coffee, though the sugar had already dissolved. Then he sent a text with a photo of the kids sitting in the dark. She swallowed, hard eyes shining. It almost worked. I opened my banking app. My finger hovered over the transfer button. "What stopped you?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then finally, I remembered them laughing. She meant that day she told them she was done, and they brushed her off like a frail bird fluttering her wings. Something inside her, small but fierce, was tired of being laughed at. So she wrote back, "I love those babies, but this is your responsibility, not mine." He didn't reply. That's when I cried, she confessed. Not for him, for me. Because I finally realized I can't carry them forever. And maybe I shouldn't have tried. What mothers eventually learn, often painfully, is that rescuing becomes enabling, and enabling becomes imprisonment. Still, love doesn't turn off like a faucet. Ruth walked the aisles of the hardware store and remembered Tom's stories of teaching Michael how to wire a socket. She stocked up on staples she used to buy for Laura Mac and cheese applesauce cereal before remembering the kids wouldn't be visiting. She kept her phone plugged in beside her pillow out of old habit, like a soldier waiting for a midnight alarm. And yet, beneath the hurt, something else grew. Strength. One Friday, she did something shocking. She took herself to a movie, sat in the back row with buttered popcorn, and laughed out loud at a joke she didn't have to share with anyone. She said it felt like being 30 again. But the loneliness still prowled. I saw it during choir practice when she lost her place in the hymnal and blinked too fast. I saw it when she walked into fellowship hall and paused, scanning the room, as though she expected one of her kids to pop up from behind a coffee urn with some new emergency. She was healing, yes, but healing hurts. Meanwhile, her children were unraveling without her. Laura's Facebook posts sharpened into weapons. Family should support each other, she wrote under a photo of her kids eating cereal for dinner. Especially mothers. The comments section bloomed with sympathy, and though Ruth never responded, she saw every dagger. Part of me is embarrassed, she told me later. Another part is furious she's airing private business to strangers. I suspected a third part, small, and scared, wondered whether people believed Laura. Then came Eric. Ruth got a voicemail from him one Monday morning. His voice was thin, like he'd been up all night. "Mom, rent's due. My car needs a new transmission. Just call me back. Please." Her hands shook. She called me breathless, asking if she should help just this once, because unlike the others, Eric didn't have a spouse or a safety net. I asked her the only question that mattered. If you give him the money, will he stand or lean? She exhaled a long, ragged breath, and for the first time she answered without hesitation, "He'll lean." She didn't send the money. Eric didn't call again that week. But her resolve took a toll. She walked more slowly, like carrying invisible weights. She cried in church and blamed it on pollen. She confessed most nights she prayed harder for her children than she had when they were toddlers running fevers. Still, she didn't bend. And gradually, as the end of the month neared, she began reclaiming corners of her life she'd abandoned. She took up gardening again and planted pansies along the walkway, their cheerful faces bobbing even on rainy mornings. She found her wedding china tucked away and used it for Sunday supper. Not guests, just herself. She sorted through photos and realized she had spent years documenting everyone else's lives and forgot she had one of her own to live. Some evenings, she sat on her porch watching headlights pass on Maple Street, wondering if one of those cars carried one of her children. But no one stopped. And yet she stayed steadfast. She told me the strangest thing the night before day 31. "I feel calmer," she whispered. "Still sad. But I think I'm ready. Whatever happens, I'll survive it." And here's the truth I hadn't realized until later. The month was never truly for her children. It was for her. By the time the 30 days were nearly over, Ruth wasn't the only one feeling the shift. Everyone in town felt the tension like humidity before a storm. That's the thing about small communities: news travels without being spoken. A look shared in the bakery aisle. A whisper exchanged in the pew behind you. Folks knew something was happening with the Miller family, even if no one said it aloud. One Sunday afternoon, I found Ruth sitting on her porch in her husband's old rocking chair, eyes fixed on the street, as if waiting for something she couldn't name. The chair creaked in that comfortingly familiar front porch way, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat she was rediscovering. She told me then how her children had escalated their tactics. Michael, booming, blustering, used to being obeyed, had begun guilt calls. He'd leave messages that started calm enough, but always curdled into anger by the end. "You don't want your grandkids freezing. You've changed since Dad died. I guess you're done being a mother." The last one nearly gutted her. He said it like a curse, she whispered, fingers tightening around her mug. And a part of me believed him. But another part of her, the part that had sat with me on that church porch weeks ago, was waking up. Then there was Laura. If Michael attacked with force, Laura used emotion like a knife-sharp precise, designed to cut where it hurt most. She sent me voice notes, Ruth confessed bitterly. Sobbing. Saying the kids were suffering, that she felt abandoned, that she didn't have anyone left in the world. I stared at her quiet. "And what did you say back?" "I didn't." She sighed. I couldn't trust myself to answer kindly if I opened the door even a crack. But Laura didn't stop there. Ruth found out her daughter had dragged extended family into it, calling her siblings her cousins, even her Aunt June, a woman who hadn't dialed Ruth's number since Tom died. They all left messages offering advice, thinly disguised judgments about how a mother should behave. "Everyone has an opinion," she muttered wearily, "as long as they're not the ones paying someone else's bills." And then came Eric and his silence. For a while, he simply disappeared, as though not asking meant he wasn't struggling. But silence has weight. Every day, without a text, every hour the phone sat still on the table, was another stone pressing into her chest. "Eric worries me the most," she admitted, voice softening. "He's always floated through life like a leaf on water. Now that he has to paddle." She trailed off. I knew what she was afraid to say, that without her, he might drown. And yet she held the line. "You told me boundaries are a gift," she murmured. "I didn't understand that then. Now I think I do." She gestured around her. This month wasn't just hard. It was clarifying. She went on to tell me the ways she'd begun reclaiming her life, tiny rebellions against decades of self-sacrifice. She dug out her sewing machine, dusted it off, and started piecing together a quilt from old shirts, her husband's, her own, even a shirt Eric wore in high school. "It's like stitching the story of my life," she said. "Only this time, I'm in it." She discovered a local hiking group for women over 60 and joined them for a Saturday trail walk. Her knees complained and her breath came short, but she returned glowing. "I forgot how good it felt to move without dragging an adult child behind me," she joked. She signed up for a senior center cooking class, just a handful of women learning how to cook for one or two, instead of a herd of hungry kids, as she put it. She even considered getting a small dog. "I'm letting myself want things again," she told me, surprised by the words. But there were still scars. One afternoon, I stopped by her house to drop off a pie, and I caught her sitting on her couch, clutching a framed photo, Tom smiling, the kids little, and shining-eyed, a time before money became more valuable than presents. "They used to run to me," she said softly. Tears caught at the edge of her lashes. "Not for money, for warmth, for safety, for love." My heart ached for her, the mother, mourning not just distance, but innocence gone. We sat together for a long while, letting the quiet speak. Finally, she sighed. "Maybe I gave too much for too long. Maybe I taught them to expect me to fix everything. And now they're angry I stopped." I nodded. Love without limits teaches the wrong lesson. She looked at me then, understanding dawning slowly. "That I'm not a source of money," she said firmly. "I'm their mother." And it was in that sentence that she crossed a line invisible to everyone but herself. The final test came the night before day 31. Michael showed up without warning. He stood on her porch, shoulders squared, jaw tight. He didn't ask to borrow. He demanded. "Mom, this is insane," he snapped. "Everyone relies on family. You're the one acting like a stranger." When she didn't budge, his voice cracked. "I don't know how to fix this month without you." She told me she nearly crumbled. But she didn't. Instead, she said a sentence that would echo into the next day. "Son, I raised you to survive without me. If I step in every time life gets hard, I undo all the years I spent teaching you to stand." He blinked, stunned. For the first time, he didn't yell. He left quietly, and she went to bed with her heart pounding, knowing tomorrow was day 31. The day the storm would break or pass. What she didn't know was that the storm wasn't going to break over her. It was going to break over them. They came on a Monday morning, a flat gray Midwestern day that couldn't decide between rain and sun. I had just poured my second cup of coffee and was debating whether to call Ruth. Day 31. The finish line she'd whispered about with equal parts dread and pride. Before I could reach for the phone, it rang. It was Ruth, but not the calm, steady Ruth I'd grown used to. Her voice shook. "Evelyn," she said, "they're here." For a moment, I didn't understand. "Who?" "All of them," she breathed. "The kids, they're on my front porch." I could picture it already, her little yard, the pansies bowing in the breeze, and 3 grown adults standing where superheroes and princesses once lined up on Halloween. "Do you want me to come over?" I asked. There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller but steadier. "Yes. Please." I was there in less than 10 minutes. At our age, we drive more carefully than we used to, but my hands were tight on the wheel, and my heart thudded louder with each block. I'd walked with her through the quiet part of the month. I had no idea how to walk her through this part. When I pulled up, the sight hit me hard. 3 cars crooked along the curb. Michael standing closest to the door, shifting his weight, shoulders slumped. Laura on the top step, face blotchy, tissue crumpled in her fist. Eric leaning against the railing, arms folded, eyes red-rimmed. And Ruth, small but somehow taller than all of them, standing just inside the doorway, her hand on the knob. I stepped out quietly, not wanting to intrude, but not willing to leave her alone. She glanced my way, relief washing over her face. No one spoke at first. Laura lifted her head. "We can't do it," she whispered. "We thought we could, but we can't." Ruth's fingers tightened on the frame. "Can't do what?" "Can't live like this," Michael burst out, his voice cracking. "We're drowning, Mom. The bills, the kids, the rent, it's all falling apart. We thought you'd give in before it got this bad." There it was, the confession. They had counted on her breaking. Ruth swallowed, and for a moment I thought she might. Her eyes moved between them, the son who rode on Tom's shoulders, the daughter who crawled into her lap after bad dreams, the youngest who clung to a stuffed bear. They were older now, but in that moment, all I saw were children asking their mother to make the monsters go away. "What happened?" she managed. Laura looked down. "The power company sent the final notice. They're shutting us off tomorrow." She sucked in a breath. "I can't keep the kids warm, Mom. I can't buy groceries and pay rent and put gas in the car." Michael rubbed his forehead. "My credit's shot. The bank won't extend anything. I had to borrow from my boss to make last week's truck payment. If I lose that truck, I lose my job." Eric finally spoke. "I got fired," he murmured. "I was late too many times. Couldn't afford to fix the car. The bus doesn't line up with my shift." He looked up, eyes full of shame. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I feel like I'm 10 again, waiting for you to come fix it." Ruth's hand trembled. She studied each of them, and I could almost see the memories: flickering bandages, field trip money nights she stayed up sewing costumes so they wouldn't feel poor. "You've always known what to do," Laura said almost accusingly. "Until now." It would have been so easy for Ruth to step aside, open the door, and say, "Come in. I'll call the bank. I'll cash what's left of my retirement." I could feel that old impulse pressing against her. Instead, she did something different. She stepped fully outside and closed the door behind her with a soft final click. That small sound sent a shiver through me. "I hear you," she began, voice gentle but firm. "I'm not blind to your struggles. I know life is expensive and hard. I know you're scared." Tears spilled down Laura's cheeks again. Michael looked away. Eric stared at the boards. "But I need you to hear me too," she went on. "For 10 years since your father died, I've done everything I could to keep you comfortable. I paid bills you couldn't pay. I took out loans so you wouldn't lose apartments, cars, your pride. I told myself I was helping. Maybe sometimes I was." Her gaze sharpened. "Most of the time, I was rescuing you from consequences you needed to face." Michael opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand. He fell silent. "Every time something went wrong," she said, "you came to me. Not to each other. Not to a counselor. Not to your bosses to ask for more hours. To me, your mother." She shook her head. "That stopped being support a long time ago. It became dependence, and it's taken pieces of my health, my savings, and my peace." She drew a breath. "This month was the first time in years I paid only my own bills. I slept through the night. I quilted. I took a walk without feeling like I was dragging 3 adults behind me." Her eyes softened. "I love you. Nothing will change that. But I will not go back to being your ATM." Laura let out a strangled sound. "So that's it. You're just going to watch us fall apart." Ruth stepped closer. "I won't watch you fall apart," she said. "I will watch you grow up." The words hung there. Eric swiped at his face. "You don't get it, Mom. We're already behind. We don't know how to catch up." Something eased in her shoulders. "Then let me help you in a different way," she said. "Not with my bank account. With my time. With my experience. Sit down. All of you." To my surprise, they did, Michael on one step, Laura on another, Eric on the rail. And there, on that worn wooden porch, after 30 days of silence, a different kind of rescue finally began. They sat on that porch the way they hadn't gathered in years, not around a table with food, not in a hospital waiting room, not at a holiday forced by calendar guilt, but shoulder to shoulder, like a family rediscovering itself in the last place it expected. For a long moment, no one spoke. The breeze teased the wind chimes Ruth had hung after Tom died, their soft notes drifting between sentences not yet formed. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower sputtered to life. Life went on quiet, mundane, unbothered by the unraveling and rebuilding happening on that small rectangle of wood. Finally, Ruth broke the silence, not with judgment or a lecture, but with a simple question. "What do each of you truly need to stand on your own 2 feet?" The question startled them. They were ready for a refusal, a scolding, maybe even a few "I told you so's." But a roadmap, that was new. Michael cleared his throat. "I need to redo my budget," he said slowly. "We spend too much eating out, and I need to stop counting on money that isn't coming." His voice thickened. "I guess I need to learn to tell my kids no sometimes too." Ruth nodded, not triumphantly, but thoughtfully. "That's a good start." Laura, mascara smudging under her eyes, sniffed. "I need childcare," she said bluntly. "Real childcare, not just dumping my kids on you at the last minute. I can't work steady hours without it. And," she hesitated, I need to stop feeling entitled to help every time something goes wrong. That was Laura's hardest truth yet, and it hung between us like a fragile glass ornament. "And Eric?" Ruth asked gently. He stared at his hands, then lifted his gaze, raw, stripped of defensiveness. "I need a job I can keep," he admitted, "and a car that doesn't break down every other week." "But," his voice cracked, "I think I mostly need confidence. I've been leaning on you so long, Mom, I don't know where I stop, and you begin." Ruth's eyes shimmered, not with guilt this time, but recognition. "That takes time," she said, "and choices, and consequences. But you'll get there." Eric swallowed hard. "I want to try." Something inside me eased, too. This family, stretched thin by years of imbalance, was finally acknowledging the truth. Dependency doesn't make people strong. Boundaries do. Ruth leaned back against the doorframe, letting the wood support her. "I am willing to help," she said, but differently. She held up her fingers, counting. "I'll sit with you and make budgets if you need it. I'll babysit, but on a schedule we agree on, not last-minute SOS calls. I'll drive you to interviews or doctors if a car fails, but only if you're doing the work too. No more bailing out." Michael blinked. "So, no checks?" "No checks," she repeated softly. "Not unless it's an emergency that has nothing to do with choices." Laura opened her mouth to protest, then let it close again. "Okay," she whispered. But Ruth wasn't done. "And you three need to start leaning on each other too," she added. "Siblings are supposed to share the load." She glanced at them. "When's the last time you helped each other instead of coming straight to me?" An uncomfortable silence answered. Eric let out a shaky laugh. "Probably never." "Well," Ruth said gently, "it's time to start." Michael scrubbed a hand over his face. "I don't know how we let it get so bad," he muttered. "It's like we forgot how to be adults." Ruth reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not bad people. You were overwhelmed, and I thought love meant fixing everything even when it cost me pieces of myself. We all got lost." Laura sniffed, but her voice steadied. "We love you, Mom," she said quietly. "We just didn't show it right." Ruth smiled, small, trembling, real. "I love you too. Enough to say no." Those last words, "enough to say no," did more to heal that family than all the checks she'd ever written. They spent another hour on that porch, not planning grand futures, not erasing debts with magic money, just taking practical steps. Michael called his utility company and arranged a payment plan. Laura texted a neighbor to ask about shared childcare. Eric looked up job openings on his phone and actually filled out an application with Ruth watching. Little steps, but steps in the right direction. When they finally stood to leave, they didn't rush away the way they used to, with a quick kiss on the cheek and a mumbled request tucked into their coat pockets. They hugged their mother long, tight, afraid to let go, but grateful they could. "I'll see you Thursday for dinner," Laura asked. Ruth grinned. "You bring dessert. I'll cook." Michael nodded. "And I'll fix that loose kitchen faucet for you." Eric cleared his throat. "Mom, thanks for not saving me." Ruth pulled him close. "Oh, sweetheart, I did. Just not the way you're used to." When their cars pulled away, Ruth stood in the driveway and watched them go. Not with dread, not with guilt, but with something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. I walked up beside her. We listened to the quiet for a moment. "You did it," I said. She shook her head. "We did it." Then she smiled, a deep, weary, triumphant smile I'll never forget. "And they're going to be okay. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon." She wasn't speaking from hope anymore. She was speaking from newfound certainty, certainty earned through tears, silence, and strength she never knew she had. For the first time in a long while, Ruth didn't look like a woman carrying her children. She looked like a woman walking beside them. The weeks that followed felt like the town took a deep breath along with Ruth. Where she used to move through her days with worry shadowing her steps, now there was something lighter in her gait, something steadier too. Strength has a way of settling into a person's bones once they've claimed it. By the second Thursday dinner, Ruth's house didn't feel like a crisis center anymore. It felt like a home again. Laura arrived early with a bag of groceries she brought them, not the other way around, and announced she'd signed up for a subsidized childcare list through the county. "It's not perfect," she admitted, "but it's steady. And I can work full days now." She set out paper plates and laughed when she accidentally tore one, something she hadn't done with that kind of ease in years. Michael came bustling in with his tool bag, proud as a teenager with his first paycheck. He fixed the leaky faucet just like he'd promised, and with his head still under the sink, bragged that he and his wife had gone a whole month without a single takeout meal. "Turns out pasta and jarred sauce don't kill you," he joked, "and we've saved more this month than all last year." Even Eric, quiet, uncertain Eric, showed up with something new in his eyes. Confidence. It was small, still learning how to stand, but it was there. "I start orientation next Monday," he said, almost shy. "Assistant night manager at the hardware store. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." Ruth beamed. Not a proud as peacock smile. Not a "I did that" smirk. Something simpler and more beautiful. "I see my children growing." After dinner, when the kids drifted into the living room, I helped Ruth put away dishes. She stood at the sink a moment, her hand resting on the counter, eyes closing with the exhaustion that only mothers know, the kind mixed with joy and disbelief. "You okay?" I asked softly. She nodded. "I'm tired, but in a good way." Then she laughed, bright and pure. "I didn't even check my bank account this week, not once." Small miracle, major meaning. Over the next few weeks, little transformations sparked everywhere. Laura stopped posting vague laments online, and instead shared pictures of her kids at a community event she'd found free tutoring and after-school snacks. She even thanked the program, not her mother, for the support. Michael started swapping weekends with coworkers to pick up extra hours, something he'd once declared beneath him. His wife apologized for what she'd written on Facebook and sent Ruth a handwritten card that ended, "Thank you for not giving up on us." And Eric, one day at the diner, told Ruth he'd started putting away $25 every paycheck. "Doesn't sound like much," he shrugged. "It sounds like responsibility," she replied, hugging him right there between vinyl booths. The biggest change, though, wasn't in the kids. It was in Ruth. She signed up for a yoga class at the senior center and laughed until her sides hurt trying to balance in tree pose. She started quilting with purpose, sewing memories into fabric. She found herself calling friends instead of just waiting for family to call her. She reclaimed her porch, her place, and that porch took on a new meaning. One Sunday morning, just like the first, she sat beside me under the rising sun. Same church, same bench, same warm cup in her hands. But she wasn't trembling this time. She sighed deeply, looking out at the street. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" she asked. "Letting go," I offered. She shook her head, believing I deserved to. We sat quietly with that truth. Then she added, almost to herself, "I thought love meant giving everything until I had nothing left. Turns out love also means stepping back and letting others rise." Her eyes softened. "And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your children is refuse to let them drag you down with them." I nodded, the lesson echoing deeper than either of us expected. She smiled suddenly. "And the funniest part, they call me every few days now, just to talk." We both chuckled at the irony. When she stopped giving money, they started giving time. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed, a text from Laura. "Dinner tonight, kids. Want to see Grandma? We'll bring dessert." Ruth's smile was soft and full. "You see, they come now because they want to, not because they need something." Before we headed inside, she stood up back straighter, chin higher. The sun caught strands of silver in her hair and lit her face with warmth. "You told me boundaries are a gift," she said. "You were right. They saved me. And they saved us." Then she touched my hand and added quietly, "I wish every mother could learn that before she loses herself." And that, I realized, was the real story. Not punishment, not abandonment, not revenge in its sharpest form. Something gentler and far wiser. Revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about becoming whole again and letting others do the same. As the church bells rang, Ruth turned to me with a twinkle I hadn't seen in a decade. "If someone out there is listening," she said, "and feeling drained, taken advantage of, or forgotten, maybe today can be their day one." And with that, she walked inside, not burdened, not bracing herself, but ready to worship, to live, and to love in a way that honored herself too. To anyone hearing this story, whether from a small-town church porch or a quiet kitchen table, remember this. You are allowed to keep what you've earned. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to rest. And you are still a good mother, even when you stop saving everyone else. Sometimes the best kind of love is the kind that teaches others to stand.